All right. Let's see if this technology is still working here on the interwebs. Wednesday, October 26th, 2022. Uh, it's been an interesting few weeks, and I'm happy to be back on the live stream. And anybody that's here, let's do the normal. You can see and hear me. Thaddeus, welcome. And I think today's more of an overall chat about things, state of the industry, virtual production, what that might mean for the corporate space. What is remote production compared to virtual production? And maybe we'll talk about next week as well. Thank you, Thaddeus, for the confirmation on seeing and hearing me. And again, welcome everybody to the live stream. David, I got your submission for next week's Inspired Frame Challenge. And if you don't know what that is, all you have to do is look in the description of this episode that you're watching right now. And there's a link to it next Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Our monthly episode of Camera Flask, and we are going to be doing another Inspired Frames Challenge. What does that mean? It means you take a frame from a television show, a movie, something narrative generally, possibly something recognizable, maybe not, and you create an image of your own, still image based on that. So you got to think a little bit about whether or not it's going to be tabletop or a little bit more set design and in a practical location, in studio, whatever it's going to be. And you submit based on, go to the link and read the submission guidelines. Well, based on those guidelines. So there you go. Realized my camera shifted over a little bit. I was doing some remote production studio setup today, and I went over and dialed in some settings on my Mix Pre, and I must have bumped the camera a little bit. So you're seeing a little bit more over in that corner than you normally do, and a little bit less light and stuff over here. It's bugging me. Hold on one second. What are you gonna do? It's my studio. I can do it, I guess. Pat, welcome. David, welcome. I hope the chat is lively today. It's been, again, quite some time, but at the moment, only David has submitted to the Inspired Frames Challenge. Next Wednesday, myself, Ben Barden, Caleb Pike will all be here on this channel, and we will be looking at everybody's work. And I've got to come up with something. Jeez. Hello from Greece. Come on. That's a great name, by the way. Gorillikos makes sense with the Greek tie-in there. And DJ Suckertash, one of the best handles out there. So there you go. All right, so let's have a little chat here. First of all, if you have a question, put in at the C47. I'm giving you a hard time, David, because you have at the 47. But that's the alternate. That's like we have Earth 1, Earth 2. So, you know, that's the way it goes. And give me questions. They can be general production questions. If you want to talk about new gear that's been announced, that's fine too. We had a new Sony camera announced today. Sort of right on the heels of the FX30, we now have a true hybrid camera, which is the A7R5, right? And it seems to be that the reviews are quite good. This new AI-based AF or autofocus system, so artificial intelligence AF system. Things are moving fast, and Sony is definitely in the AF game. So it's kind of crazy, crazy, crazy. At the Gem 47. That's it. That's Earth 4, maybe. So let's talk about this. Questions can come up here. I'm watching the comments and reactions. I've been thinking a lot about virtual and remote production. I've been doing a lot of remote production for the last 2+ years. And I think first we should define what those two different things are, if that makes sense. So to me, right now, virtual production sort of sits in two different categories. The first one is relatively well established. That's what we're used to, where people go in and they either build or they're renting an LED volume, which is essentially a sound stage, which has a very, very large LED wall, which can be used as essentially a projection system for what is arguably a reverse workflow for production and post. When we're talking about shows, the obvious one everybody always talks about, just like when we talk about shooting at odd shutter speeds or shutter angles, we're always talking about the sort of de facto de facto, is that even the right word to use here? The sort of go-to examples are going to be always, for some reason, Gladiator and Saving Private Ryan, right? Where you're shooting with that high shutter and then you are freezing motion a little bit more and you have that look and feel. When it comes to virtual production, we're usually talking about things like Mandalorian, though it's been around for a while. This concept of having a big volume and then that's essentially being used to be an environmental component to the set, but also because of the nature of that projection, it is also lighting talent. Partially or wholly, generally partially, but from behind, and they could be a curved volume. So there's wraparound. They could go above, sort of like a dome or a planetarium. There's different approaches to that. And we are also seeing that the lighting that is now coming in front of talent is also going through an evolution where we're basically um, doing image mapping or pixel mapping or whatever it's going to be called, where you're taking actual footage and you are pushing that to light fixtures. So you're lighting talent with similar imagery to the environment that they're supposed to be in. And beyond that part of virtual production, it very oftentimes now has to do with the cameras and sometimes the lighting that's being used in the production being tied in between real cameras and lighting and virtual cameras and lighting. So when I say a reverse of the production and post-production workflow, I mean that because very oftentimes, in order to pull off what's going to be done in terms of action for your talent and things that are happening on screen, post-production is done before production, largely. So it's not just a static background that's lighting the scene. It's actually interacting with. So you have a real camera that's moving, and then there's a virtual camera, and the way the background reacts to the camera movement with trackers and things essentially sells to the audience that this is being shot all with real cameras. But very oftentimes, that environment that's behind people is being built in a number of applications, but the go-to being Unreal Engine. And yeah, we'll fix it in post does not work well in this scenario because action has to match, and there's oftentimes a lot of things that are happening in this background that's being used that has to do with the scene itself and even blocking for talent and things like that. So that's kind of what virtual production is on the high end of the scale, if that makes sense. And then there's another type of virtual production, which is sort of taking components of what we've been talking about, or what I've been talking about, and scaling that down to what I call virtual production in the corporate world or the corporate level. And I'm still trying to figure out that puzzle, because in my mind, there's three areas where virtual production could work for corporate production, but they don't include in any of those scenarios a big, huge LED volume. So it still includes a virtual camera tied to a real camera, maybe virtual lights tied to real lights. But I'm thinking one or two cameras, and in two of my scenarios, we're probably, at least right now, not talking about LED volumes, because cost of entry, technology, all of that stuff, and support that you need for that. So one of them would be interviews. You're doing 50 interviews over 2 or 3 days. You want the environments to change. In my mind, that means you don't need a world like you would have for a Gotham or a Metropolis that you can go into and walk around the whole world, which would give you lots of different shooting scenarios depending on that set and what's available. But you have more defined locations. So it's a restaurant, it's a bar, it's a great architectural space, it's an outdoor park area. And those are built with restrictions in terms of how much you can move your virtual camera within that world. So you can probably push in, you can pull out, you can pan left, you can pan right. Um, you can look up and down a little bit, but maybe you can't spin 360 degrees. Maybe you can't look everywhere within that environment. So you can find the set that people are using, and then there's some sort of tie-in between a real camera and the virtual camera, so that when you're doing things like parallax, those things are moving together. Right? Because if you don't have that, then the background sort of moves, but it's just moving based on your camera, but it's not actually moving. The background's staying where it is, and you don't get a true parallax effect. You don't get what you would get in the real world if you were shooting with a camera and somebody had an environment behind them. So I think that, scenario one is interviews, and I could see there being a more simple approach to this, and also that you wouldn't be using a volume, which means you lose the advantage of having the background uh, light your subject, which is a big advantage of volumes and that type of workflow. So we're probably talking about a green screen workflow with a real-time preview type of situation, but you are going to a more traditional, we're going to go ahead and build out the rest of this environment in post. You might have the environment, but it's not all mapped out. Hold on one second. And maybe it includes something like this Ultimat 12 HD Mini or another product in this product line. I don't know yet. That's sort of my next learning process, is to see how this could all fit within that. And maybe it includes Unreal Engine full, or maybe it's more like a video game where you can go in and you can just go into these environments and use them as a set. But the environments, in order for it to work, DJ Succotash, more than the way it works right now, where it's, let's just think about news and think about, any type of content that uses a lot of green screen. We see that in a lot of sports stuff as well. Unless you're tying real cameras to virtual cameras, then it's not going to sell. So if they're doing that, and some people are, I mean, there's definitely some people in a lot of different spaces that are starting to do it, but they're generally not doing it with volumes. So think about I don't know, let's say a 20 by 20 green screen, and you've lit that, and then you light your talent, maybe with these pixel mapping, image based lighting solutions. And then, you've got that all set up, and then you've got some feed, so you can see a real-time preview of what your environment's going to be, keyed to the background. And then, of course, lighting has to sell part of this in terms of what's happening. So that could take a lot of time. Secondly, would be presentation based stuff. So kind of like this, but let's expand on that and think about somebody who's talking about a new product. Maybe they're doing a cooking show, things like that. And then the third scenario may actually include some sort of screen. The second one, presentation, I think is also green screen, real-time preview, so on and so forth. Maybe you're doing some pre-renders, David, that kind of goes to the Xebo system. I have not gone into the virtual production part of that product yet. I've been mainly concentrating on the keyframes and the tracking components. This is actually the system behind me over here. It's hard to see because it's, falling off in terms of lighting. And then the third scenario is tabletop, so product based. And that one may or may not include a screen. You could go ahead and go get a 85 to 100 and let's say 10-inch display and use that behind your products and tie that in with virtual cameras, and that could potentially work. Though the way it really sells is it's of course got to sell in terms of depth of field, but it's how high are the nits, the brightness of that, and more importantly, the contrast ratio, because you want that dynamic range to exist in the virtual environment in order for that to work well. So those are kind of the three areas that I think could be applicable to the corporate side of things. So we're talking again about interviews, presentations, which again, that's a pretty broad um, area in terms of what that could be, and then tabletop product based stuff. Let's check on questions here. What do we got here? Okay, so Brandon says, do you prefer products like Savage Paper for green screen backdrops or something else? I'm a big fan of foam based green screen fabric. If it's not a standard cyclorama, curved wall that's painted green. And there are some places, I think it's like EEFX or something, that sells them, and you can buy them in different sizes, with grommets, without grommets, with pocket rod, things and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, paper is a pretty difficult product to work with, mainly from the standpoint of, it wrinkles, it gets crumpled and all that stuff. So there you go. DJ Succotash, yeah, our cameras are on motorized systems with macro generated moves that work in conjunction with the virtual environment. Cool. So I'm assuming you have trackers, or there's something built into the product you're using that is communicating with the virtual environment and allowing you to do that. So I'm interested to hear more about that. So that's kind of the space that I'm thinking about when it comes to virtual production. I don't have it all sorted out. I think that for some of this, you're going to need something like an Ultimatte 12 product, because you want that real-time preview. But there's still the part of it that you have to work out, which is communicating with the engine and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I see virtual production. The Mandalorian approach, crew of 200-300 people, and the corporate approach, crew of 2 to 10 people. And I think that we're a ways away from those two converging with each other completely, but I'm very interested in figuring out that stuff. And then we'll talk about remote production. David Carroll says, I got to talk to Martin, or Martine is actually his name, from Matthews at Cinegear Atlanta, and he was great helping me figuring out how to rig those Aperture P600Cs he mentioned a while back here. Yeah. And Smoke Genie was there. Yeah, that's cool. So Remote production. Remote production is very different, which you probably know. Remote production is doing production remotely. So that could be a virtual production. It could not be. Um, to me, remote production is setting yourself up so that when you can't travel, or other people can't travel, then you can still have production going on. Now, obviously, the pandemic and COVID accelerated what we now refer to as remote production, whereby I was setting up studios all over the country and talent with cameras and lighting and sound and everything else. But I also had to do that on my end in order to do that effectively. So I started out with a camera behind a teleprompter, not so that I could read lines, but so I could see the people I was communicating with. That became this, which has now become this. Like the size has just gotten bigger because I rely upon this system. I have another monitor over here, which right now has your comments and reactions. I have my computer over here. So I've generally got 3 screens running at all times when I'm doing this. And then depending on what I'm doing, multiple cameras. But when it comes to remote production from a director's standpoint, it's generally just a single camera, right? I need to get the feed through Zoom or whatever we're using for the production at the other location, and that has to come through, and that's why I have multiple monitors, because what I'll do is have some of it here, some of it over here. People like to share screens a lot, or I'll pin a particular camera, generally the set camera, the hero camera, to this monitor, and then I'll have this to communicate with talent and everybody else. And oftentimes when we do a remote production, it's sort of a hybrid where we have people showing up. Like, for instance, tomorrow I have a production and we were setting up today. I was remote here in Oregon. They were down in LA, and they were setting up cameras and lighting and things like that. And I was walking them through, because it was a new studio space, how to do that. And then we did all of our tests. And then tomorrow, that small crew and talent will show up, and then I will come in remotely. There's going to be somebody on site who will be the on-site director. I'll come in as essentially executive producer, so a producer hat or role, but very oftentimes I am directing this way. So remote production is doing production remotely. And it may be, that there's a real production. They're all real productions, but there's a real production in terms of it's a studio space or on location, but there's components of it that have to be done remotely. Script supervisor, maybe, director, producer, um, lots of different things. So to me, remote production is here. It's here to stay. It's not going to change anytime soon. And if opportunity presents itself, then you kind of have to get yourself set up for that. And I didn't know what kind of work I was or wasn't going to get at the beginning of the pandemic. What was obvious to me is I wasn't going anywhere. I was stuck. I was going to be working out of my home for the foreseeable future. We knew when we first heard it's going to be 2 or 3 weeks that very quickly was going to become a lot longer than that. So I started running around and getting the building blocks of what I would need in order to do that. And if you've been coming to this channel for a while, especially in and around the beginning of the pandemic and things like that, you may have seen a very different background and environment to where I was. Bookcase behind me. I was in a very small room, about a 10 by 10, 11 by 11 room. And I needed to set that up to do whatever was going to come my way when it comes to remote production. And that meant having a reliable internet connection, both down and up. I knew that live streaming, Zoom-based communication and stuff like that was going to be pretty important. The collaborative component of it. And it turned out to be very much that case, where by the fall of 2020, I had a team of about 12 people or so working for a particular client, doing both production and post-production for a lot of content. DJ Succotash, my primary work is for a social media unit, and we went pretty hard into the remote production model. Yeah, we all had to, and everybody has their stories about how they dealt with that. What I was doing a lot of the time was being tasked with clients saying, "Okay, well, we are gonna cast somebody or a group of kids for the content we're creating. Once those kids were picked, we send out kits, and that's camera, lighting, audio, green screen, all of that stuff. And in fact, that's oftentimes where we'd use the foam backed green screens. Foam is really nice because it's a foam backed product that is essentially a fabric. And then when you stretch it, even if you just mist it with a little water, wrinkles go away very easily from that particular product. So I like it very much. And then we would set them up. Most of the time with people who had no clue about production, they had no experience with it except for maybe they were talent. So they had been on set before, on location, they had been in front of cameras or behind cameras watching a family member doing production. And then I had to set them up so that we could do that remotely. So this is in people's living rooms, in their bedrooms, and wherever they could set up. And we did a lot of that type of production. And if I wasn't set up properly to communicate to those people, it'd be a lot more difficult. So that's really, in my mind, what I consider remote production. So I don't think there's a confusion between virtual and remote production, but I wanted to just put it out there that I think those are, two entirely different areas. The ways that they cross over is if your virtual production has a remote production component to it, meaning that there are one or a number of people in that production that are doing the work remotely. And I'm not talking about post, though I oftentimes do have people from post on the actual productions, and they usually come in remotely for that type of stuff. So there you go. That's the overview of that. Not sure if we're going to go for a full hour today. We'll kind of have to see how it goes. For anybody that's just coming into the show, don't forget that next week is the Camera Flask episode, first Wednesday of every month. And myself, Ben Barden, and Caleb Pike will be doing the Inspired Frames Challenge. Get your submissions in by next week early, Monday or Tuesday. And there you go. Pat, I hope you get in there with something. That would be awesome. And if you look in the description on this episode, you'll see that there's a link to that live stream with a full description and breakdown of the guidelines. I'm behind on this. I've been gone for, seems like I've been gone for 3 weeks, and there's been a lot of family stuff. Everybody's okay, but it's just been a lot of things going on here. And it is what it is. Is there a little stuttery? Sometimes the interwebs gets weird. It looks okay. Okay, so thinking about something right now, Pat says, I am behind the curve. I don't know about that. Depends on what you're thinking about. That's what I'm interested in. What are you thinking about? And Pat's actually been doing some work with me recently. And if you check out the reel on the YouTube channel or on my website, there's a couple of shots in there that are from Pat, some drone stuff that was done. The end shot, especially. So there you go. Yeah, don't think too hard. That's dangerous. You know how that goes, Pat. So there you go. Just want to give my thoughts on that, and I'm really excited about what to do with this. Ultimate 12, add augmented reality and virtual environments to any broadcast. Virtual environment is not technically virtual production. In my mind, for me, it has to have that component where real and virtual cameras are tied together. So I got to figure this out. You don't have to thank me for including you in the reel. You did great work, and it made sense to put it in there. There were a lot of other things in that reel too, but I kept cutting it down, and I actually had a couple of friends of mine who took a little look at about a 3-minute cut and gave me, especially the feedback I got from them, and they're both in this industry, that crossed over. So anything that was like, yeah, and then the other person said the exact same thing, resonated. So all in all, 3 or 4 people looked at it, gave me some feedback. They just needed to move quickly, and I think it moves fast now. It's about 2 minutes long, and it just boom, goes, and I think gives a pretty good idea of the type of work that I do. Yeah, there you go. So let's get some questions going here. Let's get some conversation going. We'll go for at least another 10, 15 minutes, depending on how it goes, unless we just fall flat and this chat just goes to nothing. But the whole point of doing this live stream is to communicate, talk about things, go over stuff. And especially when we're doing these live streams like this, and at the C47 with a topic or something you want to talk about is the stuff that legends are made of. No, it's the stuff that keeps the live stream moving forward. And now that my frame is about where I want it to be, I feel like we could do it, but only with your help. All 11 of you. Wow, the numbers are going up. It's insane. YouTube, weird. Like, I just want to get to 9,500. 10,000, sure. 9,500, and it gets to like 94, 97. And then I go back the next day, and it says 9488. I don't know how that happens. It's so weird. Thaddeus says, how did you deal with getting all the gear set up on a remote shoot with non-technical people? That's a great question. I think the feather in my cap, if there is one, is that I've been teaching for a long time. So I tend to have pretty good patience, which I think is key. Because the people we were setting up, some of them were really quick. They just got it, even if they had no experience. It's just boom. And then other people, I would have to spend an hour to 2 hours trying to get them to set up a tripod correctly and learning how to level a tripod, and that a video tripod's a little different than a regular tripod, especially from the leveling standpoint. And a little cumbersome too, because everybody who got a setup also got a teleprompter, not so that they could use it the way I use it, just to communicate to people, but because they were actually running iPads with scripts. So they were actually, using a prompter. So I think patience, and then experience teaching. I've done a lot of that. So that has helped me tremendously when taking people through how to set up a camera, how to set up lights. A lot of communication. Show me this. Sometimes they would have to pipe into the Zoom meeting with their phone so I could see a different angle of where things were. And oftentimes what we did before we sent things out and we decided on using somebody for talent is we would do a whole virtual scout. So we would actually meet with them. They would go around to different places in their home. We would try to find the space that they would use as a permanent or semi-permanent, studio space. And that's what we did. For audio, DJ Succotash, what we did mostly was we sent out a boom stand with a direct to camera audio solution. In some scenarios, we got a little bit more complicated than that, but usually what we were doing is sending out an X-T4 tripod, some sort of HDMI, adapter to get a video signal into the computer for Zoom, and then lighting. It's almost always green screen. And what we would do is we'd send 2 keys. We would cross key through big softboxes. And those cross keys were also generally lighting the green screen. So we had to keep it a little bit simple. And then also sometimes like a little kick, like you see here, something to create a little bit of separation. And for audio, most of the time we were using the Video Mic NTG, which is, it's a decent mic if you get it close enough to talent. And what you're doing with that mic is oftentimes just trying to get as close as possible, but not be in frame. And give me 1 second here. About once a year, I get this like massive sinus infection. I'm in it right now. So if my voice sounds a little weird, that's what's happening. So, so we use Video Mic NTG going directly into the mic input of the camera. And what I like about that mic, probably the biggest selling point. Well, A, you can actually power it over USB-C. But B, there's a dial on the back for changing levels. So once we set up the camera to have a low recording level, not using the preamps in the camera, essentially, we could basically push that audio into camera, and then we could just set that dial. And then levels are a little low. We don't have to go into a menu. They didn't have to be a separate audio device. They could just grab the back of that Video Mic NTG, and it has that little dial. Deity has a very similar thing. All right, let's see. Hopefully that answered your question about audio. I'm still scared from remote teaching by the hour and 17. What? Took me my. I'm still scarred from remote teaching by the hour and 17 minutes it took me to. Oh, by the hour and 17 minutes it took me to get my mother-in-law to install remote access software on her computer so I could fix her email, which took 2 minutes. That's funny. David says, I had my first gaffer job where I designed the light after the director told me what he wanted. There was a paper green screen used at the small studio they rented too. What do you mean where you designed the light? I'd be interested to know what that means a little bit more, David. Good. What other questions? We have any other topics that we want to talk about? And I'm waiting for David to follow up on that. And Pat, your comment was humorous to say the least. What else do we want to talk about? Anything you want to talk about in terms of lighting? Anything you want to talk about in terms of cameras? Things like that. I'd be happy to talk about them. That would be cool with me, as my sinuses do a very good job of making me a miserable human being. What do we got? All right. Thank goodness for Advil, by the way, especially in scenarios like this. Oh, well, I'm not going to talk about it too much right now. Oh, that's funny, David. I got this little camera mount for my MacBook Pro, which just sits on there and it holds an iPhone, because I wasn't in the middle of post on anything. So I stupidly, though I think it's going to be okay, upgraded to Ventura, which is the newest version of the Mac operating system, and did the same with iOS 16, now 16.1 on my iPhone. And now with this little setup here, I can effectively, well, this is sitting on there. Cameras have to face you, using continuity, which is essentially using your iPhone as a web camera. I wonder if I could even, I'm not going to show you. Nah, that's all right. I'll do another live stream on that. I think it's interesting enough. It's pretty fascinating to me how good it's gotten. I'm game. I'm game for trying something. I just don't know how it'll feed into this system. Let me start my phone up. I usually turn it off during the episodes, but I'm gonna see if you have to turn on Wi-Fi and you have to turn on Bluetooth on both devices. They have to be on the same Apple ID, but then effectively you go into the control center and you can use your phone as your webcam. So maybe I should do this. Let's see. Yeah, I'd love to see that continuity thing in action. That's amazing. Yeah, there are some problems with it as well, but this is not going to be the whole thing here. Let me see if I can get it. Let me see if I can get it working. If I can't, so be it, right? But let's turn Wi-Fi on. Let's turn Bluetooth on. Let's turn off any Bluetooth devices that might get in the way. And let's try to see if we can, I don't know if we can make it work. Let's see. I'm going to put this on my laptop so that there's a camera pointed at me. Of course, now somebody's calling. Whoa! What the? I used the little mount here, and it must have held the two buttons together for SOS. So give me a second. I'll do this again. I was afraid that I'm gonna have the fuzz show up at my house, and that'll be a problem. I'm gonna mute here for 1 second and step out of frame, and then we'll try to get this. So let me put a question up here. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. I secretly blew my nose just now. Why not? I feel more human now. But I didn't see a question. They're coming. Let's see. Everything's going great along. It's true. They will be, Pat. Expect you to show up at my house. All right, let's see. You never know if this stuff's gonna work, but let me make sure that when I put it in the mount this time that I'm not pressing down on any of the buttons. I think we're safe. Okay, so now this is sitting up here on my computer, and I'm not going to say I remember how to do this, but let's see. I think I have to turn Wi-Fi on my computer. That could wreak havoc. You never know. I'm going to turn Bluetooth on here as well. Whoa. Okay. And now video effects. I'm going to go portrait. I'm going to say studio light, which just tends to darken some things. And then the question is, how do I switch my camera in Ecamm Live to be this camera? Source camera. Here we go. It might work. It might not. Does it? It kind of works. God, the lighting is not good. All right. That's the continuity camera. Technically, I can pick it up wherever I want, but the white balance is funky, cold Medina. But there it is, and it's on portrait right now, so you can see that it's yeah. Why is the color temp such an issue? Wondering if that's a Ecamm thing, because I wasn't having that problem before. So I'm wondering. Zoom pan. And will it actually, it's not going to affect that. Interesting. No, it's pretty good. I mean, look, I don't understand the white balance issue right now. that's the main issue that I'm having. I can choose Gem's iPhone camera in Ecamm, and let's see. That should, oh yeah. So that stuff's working now. So the camera effects are working. Picture settings. I could choose this camera and oh look, I could dial in temperature. This is all through Ecamm though that I'm doing this through. Ecamm's got some nice features in terms of being able to do things. And there we go. We went black and white. And blur effect, I guess, is just blurring the whole frame. They have a deinterlace option, and then they have resolution. Use max resolution, so I'm at 1080p. But then when I do that, the color went. I think it's just the auto white balance. You know, it might be a setting in my phone that I need to go into. But you know, this is actually pretty cool because it lets me show everybody stuff pretty easily too. So, you know, you can do that. I just don't understand why it's having a problem with focusing. Yeah, exactly. The portrait mode is a little funky. Yeah, I can go back into control center right now and we can turn it off so you can see the difference. That's still, I only set this up the other day to mess with it. So there's portrait off, there's studio light off, and then you can sort of see the studio normally. I guess I could technically just put this anywhere and set that up, and then maybe I should clean my lens too, because that's where we're getting all of those flares. A little bit better, not perfect. And then here I'll turn on portrait again, so you see it blurs the background, sometimes too much. And then studio light, you can see what it does. It just sort of puts the focus on the person, and it's almost like a vignetting kind of thing. And then center stage is garbage. It just like drops the whole resolution generally. It's okay, but in order to do that whole, it's keeping you in the frame. Here, let me put this down. Because center stage is essentially, if I move over here, it will try to follow me, but at the expense of, I think, resolution overall. So here's center stage again, look. Boom, activated. It'll always try to center the subject. So, I mean, pretty cool technology overall. Those are lava cat. Those are lava cats. Of course they are. Come on. Don't tell Caleb though. He'll be very upset. And then all of a sudden it just said that everything's currently unavailable. Who knows? All right, let's turn those off and switch back to the other camera. So here we go, Blackmagic, boom, source. Here we go, camera is going to be Blackmagic Design. Boom, we're back to that. You are 100% right, Pat. 8K iPhone. I mean, that's really, when you talk about Insta360 and, you know, those types of cameras, resolution does become very important there, because generally what you're doing is you are showing the viewer either a 1080 or a UHD ultra high def, 3840 by 2160, 16 by 9 image. But even if you're just trying to show them 180 degrees of the world, you need to have much higher resolution in order to do that and retain a base resolution. So that's where 8K cameras actually make a lot of sense. Center stage, yeah, and you know, when I set this up in a single environment, my laptop, it was a little bit better, but I think I just need to go in and turn off some auto white balance things too that are probably making it messy. Yeah, all right. Well, there you go. Here we are, 350. We got there. Bloopy. I like that term. Skin looks kind of blue. I think my skin looks kind of bloopy to begin with. So what are you gonna do? Any last questions we have here, kiddos? What we got? Anything for the record books here? Time and effort. Well, I don't know about that, David, but I appreciate you actually showing up. I mean, the fact that you, regardless of the numbers here, the fact that people actually show up to these things is ridiculous. But hopefully you learn something every once in a while. I'm sure trying to learn every day, get better at this whole thing, tech and craft. The Bloop 47. Yeah, you'll think of something before we sign off. As soon as we sign off or before? Before is better, Pat, but afterwards, then you just save it for next week. So if there's any other questions, fire them off right now. We have another 9 minutes if we need to. Again, I'll just reiterate. Next week, Inspired Frames Challenge, Camera Flask. I'd really love to get everybody's stuff in by Monday if possible. I actually have a shoot next week that's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I've purposely only done a half day on Wednesday so I can come back and do the episode. And that means the sooner you can get me your stuff, that'd be great. Rick coming in at the end here. You're killing me. Urbanowski. You missed the whole episode. Whether it was important or not that you missed it, that I don't know how to answer. But, you know, next Monday is Halloween. And then it's November. So November 2nd, Camera Flask. I would really love for your submissions to be in, other than David, who sent his in about a week and a half ago, by Monday, October 31st. It's been a pleasure, everybody. I think I'm heading off to get some more work done and then get rid of all this. It'll be gone soon. All right. Take care. Thanks, folks.